Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
I can pick up anybody from the street and they can pretty much tell me what a firefighter does. However, you're in the position now to be able to tell me why we do things, why we go to prevention activities, why we carry out protection work, why it's so important that we liaise with local businesses about dealing with rubbish and how we can prevent that. So having those active conversations with the firefighters, it shows where they are through the golden thread. And they have that understanding of the bigger picture and where they fit into our community and to society. Support doesn't just come from the top down, but it also comes from the shop floor. And if you educate the line managers, your crew and watch managers, these very experienced, very knowledgeable individuals, but if you support them to take them, to put the apprentice under their wing, so to speak, and say, this is what we're leading towards, and this is what the final point is, and this is how I'm going to take you on this journey. Well, actually, what you find is then that the apprentice feels supported, not only by the organisation, by L&D, but also from the team around them, that, and this is where mentorship from, an experienced firefighter, or even, as we're finding now, Pete, is that we've got apprentices that have gone through this journey, they come out the other end, and now they're becoming the new apprentices, mentors, because they're supporting them, because they've been through that journey. Everything's evolved, Pete, but I still think that we are a uniform service, so therefore, obviously, the discipline is still there. However, I think things have evolved. We've evolved as a service, and we needed to, however, that when you are asking firefighters to do something, and some people, having run recruits course for the first time, it can be alien to them when they're being told to do something, when potentially they've never been told to do something, for the first time in their lives, really, and they could be 20 odd years old.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. So give us a little bit of background first before we kind of go further down that rabbit hole, because one of the things I'm starting to realize as I'm having more of these conversations is that people that are doing the type of thing that you're doing and trying to bring in new and different and innovative ideas is usually because they haven't necessarily had as much of a traditional sort of route into where they are now, because you actually started in the RAF, didn't you?
Yeah, so my background is a little bit more diverse. So I started in the RAF as a firefighter back in 1998. And obviously working with fast jet aircraft, which was one of my passions at the time. So I went to a place called RAF Wittering.
Did they still have the Harriers then? They did, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
And my brother-in-law was a weapons navigator on them, and he got made redundant and then retrained as a paramedic. So I remember that sort of time period when they took them away.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. So, looking out onto the airfield, 6-7 aircraft all at the same time, either taking off or landing. Yeah, it was awesome. So great experience.
What's the entry requirements for that? Because we had a station manager from Stansted on, and he was talking about the different, because I'm going to try and throw a compliment, and please tell me I'm absolutely wrong, but I feel like places like the RAF and some of the other non-central government fire and rescue services sometimes tend to have a higher bar for entry, certainly in the physical aspects.
Yeah, so the physical aspects. So you had to join the RAF as an airman to start off with. So I had to go through the RAF recruit training prior to doing my firefighter training. So you had to become an airman first, before then, obviously, after the 10 weeks or whatever it was back then, before you then started your firefighter training. So you obviously have to go through all the weapons handling, all that sort of stuff, all the the military side of things and the militaristic elements before you even started. And I did my basic firefighter training down at MLD Manston in Kent.
Nice.
Yeah,
How are they ran then? Because do they use, again, subject matter experts, similar to the apprenticeship stuff that you do now? Do they use subject matter experts from the governmental fire and rescue service, or do they have, again, their own training departments within them?
Yeah, so back then it was absolutely, they had their own training departments, the Defence Fire and Rescue Service, and pretty much our recruits courses ran like local authority, but with the added element of the crash rescue phase at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, so went through all the BA elements, like the pumps, ladders, all the stuff you would do now, the generic firefighter training, RTC, BA, first aid back then as it was. So going back in the day, first aid at work we did back then, and then we moved on to the crash rescue phase, which was 2 or 3 weeks purely of responding to crashed aircraft, be that from helicopters to wide-bodied aircraft to fast jets.
I wanted to ask you about aspects of discipline, and I'm not trying to go too far down a discipline rabbit hole, but I really like the way that some of the RAF and other people do it, because I tend to think sometimes, with the greatest respect, they produce a better product at the end of it, because there is still an underlying aspect of military style to it. Now, I know obviously the Massey Shore days and the origins of the fire service still are you draw by numbers, and there's an air of Navy military embedded within it. But that has been one thing, and I know you work so much now with not brand new firefighters, but with firefighters moving into that competency. What's your kind of finger on the pulse check around discipline versus self-discipline versus standards versus the end product? Because we have become a lot more aware of how we're developing firefighters now, and we're trying to get rid of some of that, the old practices and the bullying that happened of old. And yeah, we want to throw all that out, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what was your experience? Because you did obviously RAF, and then I think you then went into another aspect of atomic weapons establishment as a crew manager there. But then you also did, the Avons, the Manchesters. So you've got a really great spectrum. What's your kind of pulse check on that?
Yeah, I think everything's evolved, Pete. And but I still think that we are a uniform service, so therefore, obviously, the discipline still there. However, I think things have evolved. We've evolved as a service, and we needed to, however, that when you are asking firefighters to do something, and some people, having run recruits course for the first time, it can be alien to them when they're being told to do something, when potentially they've never been told to do something, for the first time in their lives, really, and they could be 20 odd years old.
How do we balance that with not wanting to scare people away from the job? Because recruitment is, ironically, in my limited experience, becoming a more difficult thing these days, but you're also picking up some of the aspects that haven't been covered in the character building side of that person's early years development. They'll have had a different parenthood, a different type of schooling. And this is why people struggle sometimes when they're like, oh, it's changed. Have you seen the old, have you seen that? Was one of my favorite ones, the picture of the butterfly and the caterpillar sat at the cafe. Yeah, where the caterpillar's like, you've changed. And the butterfly's like, yeah, we're supposed to, because everything else has changed. Society has changed. So we do need to change because we draw from society and we serve society. But some people look at change and go, oh, you should have just kept it how it was. But the people coming in are different and the services are different as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that what we don't want to do, we've got some fantastic people coming into the fire and rescue service before, with different diverse backgrounds that have never been in the fire and rescue service, in the past. And I think that if we don't evolve, we could potentially scare some of the future leaders and some fantastic firefighters away from the job.
100%.
And that's the last thing that we want. And I think that it's really important that whilst we, during our talent and our recruitment phase of bringing people in, we explain exactly what they're coming into. And I think that's really important, that people have an awareness of what they're coming into with the fire and rescue service, and we give them an honest appraisal, really, of what the job is and what it's like. And I think that's really important.
I think we're getting better at that. I think we went through a period, and actually, if I'm totally honest, I think we're kind of still in that period where all of the cultural reviews and stuff scared people to death of putting anything on social media, putting anything out there. And I think that's had a tremendously negative effect on recruitment, because when you look at the RAF or you look at the military, they are always recruiting, aren't they? Yeah. Always. They've always got a recruitment campaign out. It's not like when it rolls round. And with the fire service, I think you should always actively be recruiting. Even if you haven't got a course coming up, you should be building that. If you were a business, you'd be building up a mailing list. It's astonishing when I talk to corporate comms teams across the UK. I'm like, what should, because we're going to have their chief on or whatever. I said, when it comes out, here's some stuff if you want to put it out on your mailing list. And they're like, what's a mailing list? I says, your list of emails to people that are interested in Manchester Fire and Rescue Service or fucking wherever. And then they're like, oh no, we don't really have one. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have one? What do you do when you recruit? We just put some posts on social media. And I'm like, and then you wonder why barely anybody's applying. And I'm not saying that's the only factor, but I think we need to open the doors up. And it's kind of the origin of the podcast. It's like, guys and girls, look, we're not here to commit professional suicide, but we need to just talk like human beings about what the job is like, not some corporate BS like we're a shiny piece of steel that's perfect and blah, blah, blah. Because then what ends up happening is you get the cultural reviews coming out and it's like, well, that wasn't the case. What's really happening? So I'm like, we should actively be recruiting all the time. And we should be talking to people about what the job is like, because you're absolutely right. We need to give people a realistic understanding of what the job is today. And we do still go out to structural fires. You do still go out to hazmats and RTCs and whatever. But there's a massive aspect of prevention as well. We're looking for the thinking firefighter now, aren't we, I think?
We really are. No, I couldn't agree more, though. We want people that, it's not, we don't want just robots. We want people that are going to think about what they're doing. And the big thing that I always say with that one, Pete, is we want people to be able to put the why into the what.
Yes.
Why do we do what we do? Does that make sense? And I think
100%. Yeah. If you, I forget who said it, but if you understand the why, you can come up with any how or something like that. There's a million hows and whats. But if you understand the why behind what you're trying to achieve, then it's like, I believe that's like your strategy. It's like a 5-lane highway.
Yeah.
The why is north. We're heading north. Okay. How we want to head north? Loads of ways. We could take the whatever, the M1, the M6, the whatever. Do you know what I mean? You can take all of these ways north, but north is the direction. Now, there's loads of strategic ways to do it, and you've got to stay inside the lines. But yeah, I think if people don't have a comprehension of that, because like you say, some people that join to help people is a different thing to people that join to put out fires. If you join to put out fires, you go to less fires, you get the fuckums, you don't like the job anymore. But if you join to help people, then, and as romantic and like Miss World as that might sound, a lot of people are like that. That was my thing, so I enjoy doing the first responder stuff for medical calls and stuff like that, because my brother-in-law was in the paramedics, and I enjoy that aspect. But some people are like, you want us to run EMS calls? No, absolutely not. I am a firefighter. That's not what I signed up for. And that's a different thing, isn't it?
It really is. No, I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. And then this is one of the things that obviously we'll move on to in a bit when we talk about the assessments.
Yeah.
It's one of the caveats that I said to the assessors and actually to the apprentices when we're giving them the overview, that I can pick up anybody from the street and they can pretty much tell me what a firefighter does.
Yeah.
However, you're in the position now to be able to tell me why we do things, why we go to prevention activities, why we carry out protection work, why it's so important that we liaise with local businesses about dealing with rubbish and how we can prevent that. So having those active conversations with the firefighters, it shows where they are through the golden thread. And they have that understanding of the bigger picture and where they fit into our community and to society.
Because they also don't understand the tick. So they don't understand. That sounds a bit, offensive. But I mean, or a bit condescending. Sorry. They don't sometimes connect that golden thread to also the fact that it protects them. Like when I do assessments at different places across the UK, one of the things we ask after a series of questions sometimes is, how does that reduce the risk to firefighters?
Yeah.
If you're talking about community safety, well, it just makes that business safer. Okay, and how does that reduce the risk to a firefighter? Or how does that increase the socioeconomic connection to the community? I'm like, follow the thread. Yeah, okay, there's nobody in the building, but if we save the hotel, then the 50 people that work for that hotel and their families can sustain a living, and the 100 people that visit that hotel every month and bring £3 million into the local community increase, and if we make that hotel safer, then the likelihood of a firefighter ever needing to go in there is dramatically reduced. If a firefighter never has to go in there, there's a reduced likelihood they're ever going to get injured. And it's that thread that people sometimes, not always, but struggle to follow through because the why is not quite there. Does that make sense?
It really does, yeah, yeah, and that's exactly. So these are the conversations that we have with our firefighters during the professional discussion, and that's absolutely it. That's what we're looking for. That they've got a grasp of that situation and where they fit into that. Into that area. So it's not that they just go and do something because my watch manager told me to.
Yeah.
That they have a bigger understanding and of the reason why we actually do what we do.
Hey, Dave Hodge again that we're releasing tomorrow. We were speaking about just the most important person in the room, and I always remember hearing it referred to as the hippo's opinion, the highest paid person's opinion, and people would start nodding along when the hippo's in the room, and you're like, don't just nod along with me because of my rank. Do you understand what I'm saying? And if you don't agree, say you don't agree. That's cool. That's great. Otherwise, we're stuck in this echo chamber, which kind of brings me full circle back to, so you started in the RAF and this diverse development that you went through, because take me then to, that movement from the RAF into your crew manager role with the atomic weapons establishment.
Yeah, so that was a very different location. So it was the only place in the country with an explosives and nuclear license. So very different, very much more like hazmat orientated, as you can imagine, dealing with very different things, and with very different risks and challenges as well involved. So what I was trying to do, obviously going into that environment, is broadening my spectrum, broadening my horizon, and actually realizing that the fire sector itself isn't just, it's just not local authority. And I think that that's given me so much more sort of scope now when I look at what the fire rescue services are. That actually now it's a wider environment which includes your public, private fire sectors. It includes your airports and your aerodromes and your ICIs and your businesses, chemical works, etc., along with more conventional, what more people would consider of a firefighter that's going to incidents on, in Manchester or Leicester or whatever. It's very different, but we do have a broad spectrum of the fire sector in the UK.
So help people understand again, because like I said before we came on, like getting stuck in our own biases, there is pros and cons to doing non-governmental, non-standard fire service interpretation when people think of the 999 fire service comms versus your airports and your AWE or your RAF as an example. Give us some of the pros and cons, because there's incredible and fantastic reasons to go and work for those organizations. But then there is also differences in exposure, travel, different aspects.
Yeah, so when I was in the RAF, I traveled the world, went to the Falkland Islands down there. So obviously working in very unique environments there. Worked in Cyprus, so we're talking temperatures, you can imagine the environment, the people, everything was very different there. The exposure to different type of incidents. I was in Kosovo as well in 1999 during the peacekeeping campaign, working alongside.
Where did you stay in Kosovo?
In a tent. Yeah, we were in...
Were you on an old airbase?
Yeah, we were at Pristina Airport.
Mate, so, I've been there twice. John. Oh, what was his name? John. Bloody hell, this is horrific. Now I'm going to forget his name. But he was like a retired colonel, John, and he'd gone over there. Oh, I'm going to fuck this up. With not the Peace Corps, but he went over there with, I can't remember, basically when they were trying to help Kosovo get away or delineate or separate themselves from the invasion of, help me out, brother. Who was it?
Serbia?
Yes, the Serbians all came in, and like the Serbians were being beaten in the street. If anybody hears you speaking Serbian, even now, like it's still pretty rough because you still see all the bullet holes in the walls and other sorts of. But yeah, we went there with UKISAR and stayed on probably the same military base where they still have all the firing ranges and everything like that. Man, it's a whole different world in Kosovo, isn't it? Like the pay and the way they treated the dogs, just as a random abstract, like there was stray dogs all over the camp, like puppies and everything, and people hated them and like they were scared of them, and it was weird. But anyway, sorry, I digress. So yeah, all that travel.
Yeah, so very different place. So, we were dealing with unexploded landmines, everywhere. It was, like you said, packs of dogs trying to round people up. At the time it was minus 35. Wind chill factors, we were intense.
We did have 4 pillars of survival in Kosovo, and that is the coldest I've ever been. And I've been to Canada and a few other places, but it was something about how cold it was there. it was
Yeah.
ridiculous.
I've never felt cold like that. So, if my wife ever mentions she wants to go camping now, I think I've still got flashbacks from being in the tent for such a long period of time. So yeah, we don't camp anymore. But again, great experiences.
Character
Dealing
building stuff, 100%.
100%, and dealing with fires in that situation, in that environment. So many stories that I could, about actually dealing with incidents there, and meeting obviously Bill Clinton. We met Bill Clinton while he was out there. Walked past us, so went round Air Force
For
One,
real.
Marine One, his helicopter. So great experiences. And yeah, but it was so moving on from there. Then
Why the
when
decision to move then? Sorry.
I left the RAF, I met my wife, and she was in the military as well. She was an aeromedical nurse, so she'd be going away for a period of time. Then I'd go away the year after, and it just one of those things that we wanted to settle down. And
Common thing, isn't it? Where you're like, this doesn't work for a family long-term thing. We're having our adventures and it's great, but the RAF and the military and the Navy is an immersive thing, isn't it? It's not really just a job. It's a whole lifestyle.
it is a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle. It really is. And so I thoroughly enjoyed my time. I've got nothing but positive experiences and, great memories from the RAF. And it made me really grounded, if I'm honest, in the job. And it gave me a real sort of, a real appreciation of the job, but also that there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
And with the fire sector, and it's not.
I think a lot of people don't know that as well, and I don't know how much because again the RAF is so huge, and so is the military and the Navy and whatever. They just advertise the whole thing in general, but I think they have gotten a little bit better with some of the really good videos that they do now, where they show the many different roles that you can do. But again, with the greatest of respect, the RAF advertisements tend to be very, as you would expect, Air Force-esque. But I bet a lot of people applying for fire and rescue services across the UK probably don't realise the opportunities that also lie in places like that. And also airports and stuff like that, all the MOD. There's still a few American bases over here, isn't there, with the firefighting?
You're absolutely right. Place like Alconbury, So, my base, I was based over in near Peterborough at RAF Wittering for a long period of time, and then I moved up to RAF Waddington. Working with different aircraft. So the opportunities are huge, and I think marketing has taken, like you said, then back in the day, I didn't even realise that the fire and rescue service or the fire service was in the RAF, the RAF fire sector. It was only when I went in because I'd always wanted to be a firefighter. I knew that from an early age, but when I went to local authority at 18, they said literally it was a go and get some experience, kid, and go and get some life experience. Go and get some life experience. And I was actually looking to be a PTI at the time in the RAF, and someone mentioned, oh, they do they have a firefighter role. But I didn't know. It's one of those things that it wasn't clear. Nobody made it clear to us at the time. But I went to it, and I actually loved it. So I went to a couple of days trial. So it was almost like a pre-selection test, if you will. And the rest is history. So that was the chosen field that I wanted to go down.
So talk to me about that transition then, because maybe we could just go towards pay for a second as well, knowing that you've done local authority, RAF, private sector, and also you probably visit a bunch of airports, because that is one thing. And I always try and stay super transparent with the podcast. Like the friends that I've spoke to at Stansted, their pay is noticeably higher than people in local authority.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I mean, I worked in the RAF. Now, obviously, the terms and conditions in the RAF were great. You got your accommodation back in the day. You got fed, and the rest of it was like for a young person that I was at the time. The rest of it you got paid.
Fun tokens.
It really was. It was, and obviously all your accommodation, and it was a zero contribution pension as well. So when you think about that, you didn't contribute towards your pension. Then I went to work in the MOD. It was a lesser contribution as well. So I think we paid 1.5% towards our pension contribution with the MOD back in the day. So, and the pay when I was working at AWE, it was a lot better with the potential of overtime and having to maintain that crewing. It meant that that the pay was more favourable than local authority.
But then I suppose the downsides, let's just total transparency, how many, because then again, I just give the airports and the MODs as examples, they're never going to any jobs. They have like 5 call outs a year. and most of the time they're running down the runway just to wave at something and drive back. And that's just my own personal opinion. Please feel free to say, no, Pete, that's bullshit. They do all this and X, Y, Z as well. They go to a lot of medical calls in the terminals and things like that. But some people, I say there's no solutions, only trade-offs. Do you know what I mean? So you get the better pay and maybe the better conditions, but you're probably not going to go to a lot of jobs. So it's all about, what works for you, I suppose.
Yeah, I understand. I understand where you're coming from, and ultimately, but the jobs that they're working in, they don't want to be going to jobs every day because the potential and the risks that they're dealing with. So as you mentioned, AWE, we don't want to be going to incidents there every day.
From a business risk perspective, something has gone tragically wrong to it. You're not interacting with Joe Public, who's maybe only got a couple of brain cells to rub together, and that's only a few members of the public. I don't mean all the public, but people that are really struggling with their life in really challenging socioeconomic conditions, and they're starting fires in their sink because they haven't got any gas or electric. You're not dealing with that.
No, you're not. You're dealing with very high risk. And it's the same as the airports in the aviation side. Yes, they deal with very different incidents and very diverse. However, thankfully, it's not every day that planes drop out of the sky. So, and so that's thankfully, but they're always practicing and training for worst case scenario. However, as you say, they are dealing on a daily basis with medical incidents. They are dealing with, different types of aircraft incidents that we potentially won't think about, such as hot brakes, etc., or potential technical issues that there could be with aircraft. But certainly they're not responding to the number of calls that local authority are, which meant that, so when I was thinking about when I was at AWE, an opportunity came up in Avon Fire and Rescue Service, and I was thinking that was one of my big drivers, really, that I wanted to go to operational incidents. And that was the biggest driver for me to transfer into Avon.
So were you able to transfer across these things? Because it also gives us a nice connection to the aspect of the endpoint assessments and the firefighter, the level 3 firefighter stuff. Because did you have recognized qualification skill sets XYZ from moving through those things? Because this is one of the things that I hear again from military, RAF, and even historically people in the fire and rescue service. They don't inherently come out with any formal qualifications at times, and they can end up trying to transfer into different services, or even when they come to the end of their career and they're like, I've done 30 years of this thing and I have no qualification to show for it that the industries would recognize.
Yeah, so by this time, Pete, I don't know if you remember, we went through a period of time with IPDS.
Yeah, we did. A lot of people won't remember that. We have a lot of new people joining the services. We went through IPDS, and then the IFEs had their day, and there's lots of stuff that's happened. So try and help us all connect the dots looking backwards.
Right. So back in the day, we're talking early 2000s now. We went through integrated IPDS. It was about how you develop as an individual, and it was looking at managing different instances and how you can assimilate that to the fire and rescue service. And it was more of a leadership and management sort of assessment centre. So we went through an assessment centre, which was hosted by Avon Fire and Rescue Service back in the day, whilst I was working at AWE. And it was for the crew manager role. I'd already done my LF qualification by this stage. So, the generic old LF papers. So I'd done all them. I'd done the practical element as well. So I was a competent LF. I was a competent BAI by this stage. So I'd done my breathing apparatus instructor qualification. And I was also an assessor. So if you remember back, I was an A1 assessor. It was called.
Yeah, they died a death as well, didn't they?
Yeah. So, everything's evolved. It's still the same thing, but things have just evolved somewhat,
I'll just mention this because I've just looked it up, just had a look. So I've got a paper here from one of the Dear Chief Fire Officer things. It's a North Wales Fire and Rescue Service Chief Fire Officer 2004. And the background on the IPDS is a competence-based training development system for a selection, training, development, and assessment of all fire and rescue staff, both uniformed and non-uniformed. So I forgot that. This was green and grey, but wasn't it? From a point of attraction to service right through to retirement, it embraces a full range of a fire service activity and is intended to enable all fire service staff to attain and subsequently maintain a level of competence required to fully meet the demands of their role. Implementing IPDS means a move from the train me to the how can I be developed arrangement. So yeah, this was back 2004, 2002. Wales started implementing that by the look of it. So just for a little bit of context for people.
Yeah, so we're talking 20 years ago now,
Yeah,
you know.
that was
So,
when NOS was new. No, not official standards. Christ, that was new then. Jesus.
well, it just seems that we've gone through this
I
evolution.
know.
You know,
Yeah. And that's
everything.
why you can sympathize with some people when they go, "Oh, we're just reinventing the wheel," because we have been there with some stuff. And it'd be great. And I'd keep interrupting you. I'll stop. I apologize. But it's like sometimes there's change for change's sake, and sometimes we're reinventing the wheel. But yeah, because we had the MVQs back then as well. And now actually we've come back to MVQs a little bit, haven't we? But sorry, carry on.
No, everything has a habit of coming back round, Pete.
Yeah,
You know,
fashion, everything. The cyclic, isn't it?
it is. You know, I'm sure I've still got a denim jacket somewhere that
Mate, I'm
one
waiting
day
for the denim
I'm
dungarees to come back. I look like a hillbilly, bold hillbilly when I wear them, but I'm like, I love my denim dungarees. They just look stupid when I wear them.
everything's cyclical, and
You're saying don't throw
everything.
them away just yet. You're saying they're
Please
coming
don't. Yeah. Keep them all.
back.
Keep hold
Okay,
of me.
okay, really.
Definitely keep hold of them. You never know. But everything has a habit of coming back round, you know, and I think that we have to learn from things. We can't just drop it and now say, this is the new, this is, that everything we've been doing is wrong. Because it's,
Yeah, that's you see that.
that's wrong. We're now looking at this. Now that's wrong. Let's look at this. I think we need to take the learning from things. Everything that we do, there's a reason for it. And that's one of the biggest things that I've learned recently. Every fire and rescue service that I've been to over the last couple of years does something slightly differently. Right now, there's a reason for that. It's not, but it's because of their experiences, it's their environment, the way that they've grown and evolved as a service.
It's also their funding. You know what I mean? A lot of people don't understand this. They go, "Oh, why is it all empire building? Everyone has their different ideas." And it's like, no. What is it? So 40% comes from, I'm going to get this wrong. 40% usually comes from local taxes. 40% comes from businesses. And I think it's only something like 20% comes from government. So a lot of it's to do with where do you live, the affluence of your community, London versus Scotland versus Manchester versus Devon or whatever, they've got a different bucket to play with. So we can't all go, I tell you what, let's all buy the brand new Aero Ladder platform. Let's all buy the brand new Interspiro or Drago or whatever sets. And people go, well, I can't because I've got 1,000 staff, or I've only got 200 staff, or I've got 600 staff. So that's what people don't always appreciate. They're like, why can't we have what so-and-so has? We're all firefighters. And it's like, that's the sort of burden of not having exposure, or sometimes not even being interested in seeing the bigger picture.
I work with Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service really closely at the minute, and they've got one notable high-rise building.
Yeah.
Within their environment, which is very different than London.
Yeah.
For a argument's sake. Yeah, no, I think you've got a really valid point there, Pete, that, it is down to public perception and, knee-jerk reactions, which goes back to, that we change things a lot, whereas we need evaluation has to underpin everything we do in this job.
It has to be a data-driven decision, not emotional, not, it's the way it's always been on, nepotism and all that jazz.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. We've got to look at why we do what we do, and then what are the benefits, and your return on your investments every time. Why do we do things? How can we make it better? And not just as a sector, but as individuals. In your job, and I don't think we take the time to evaluate ourselves enough in our roles, and that's something that I've noticed as I've gone from different organisations, and then when I landed in Avon Fire and Rescue Service, where I was probably one of the first people to transfer in from a non-local authority fire service.
Really?
Yeah, I was, and that was very different. Sort of.
I dragged you off down a rabbit hole there. Sorry, take us back to the qualifications you did or didn't come into, and overlay that, with the view that you now have in trying to standardize things across the UK and give people recognized qualifications.
Yeah. So back then, when I transferred into Avon, I completed my supervisory manager IPDS ADC Development Centre, as we talked about before, and I had a suite of qualifications and experiences that, in theory, recognised me as a leading firefighter. they took me through the processes in Avon, but it wasn't consistent with what they had before. So it wasn't, there was quite a few holes, if you will, where they weren't too comfortable with my background. So they put me on like a inter-service transfer course.
What do they do? Like a
And that,
skills fade type assessment? Did you have to sit an assessment?
yeah,
Did you have to do, I imagine you did an incident command reaccreditation and they kind of tilted their head and went, meh, it's not how we do it.
I mean, a lot of it, I think they were quite surprised that actually it was pretty much the same with the incident command. There was things like that, certainly from my own gap analysis, I knew that from my background, I didn't do much road traffic collision
Yeah.
work because of my background, I didn't need to, so therefore I knew that was a gap. 13.5 meter ladders was a gap because we hadn't used 13.5 meter ladders up till that point. So when and the way that different services do BA procedures, Pete, you'll know in your role, that every service does BA something slightly differently.
They do.
There's so you'll know that actually, that different search procedures, door tactics, tactical ventilation, ventilation strategies, etc., all slightly different. So when they looked at me, it was like, right, how do we fit this round peg in our square hole? And it was how do we sort of, and that which really has made me think now about the consistency and the standardized process that we've got with the apprenticeship. So we've become full circle, and it's really made me think about how we then assess and what we're looking for when it comes to endpoint assessments. When we're signing firefighters off, as that final check and balance, which we currently do. We're looking at fire services and we're looking at apprentices, and I source my assessors from all around the country. So from diverse backgrounds, all the different services, which I'm sure we'll go on to in a bit, all with their individualized services, knowledge and experiences. But now what I'm trying to do is we're giving them an assessment plan, which is generic against the apprenticeship standard, not what Firefighter X does in Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service.
How do you make that? And we'll go there now because I think it makes sense for us to move to that. How do apprenticeship assessment companies or organizations such as yours then come up with something that can be applied as a model or template to a wide variety of services? Because, as an example, if we look at something like National Operational Guidance, fantastic stuff, really well put together, but it's intentionally vague because it's just trying to give you some overarching principles around the dangers, the hazards, how to mitigate the risks, potential strategies, but it never goes down really to the tactical aspects, because that's the bit in the fork in the road where a lot of services tend to head off in different directions. So when you are trying to come up with a model, and again, different organizations have probably done it slightly differently, how do you avoid lowering the bar? Sounds harsh, as though it's, but how, you've got to find stuff that's common enough to assess across the UK. Okay,
so the way that, obviously, for people that aren't sure about how the apprenticeship works and endpoint assessment plan, how endpoint assessment plans are put together, they all come together from trailblazer groups. So that comes from fire sectors across England. So that could be the armed forces, civil aviation, local authority and other small private sectors will come together and they will put together an assessment plan. So it's the generic areas that they all need to cover.
How is that organised then? Sorry. How is that? Because we've almost, and I know I'm keep interrupting, but I just want to understand that bit because I don't even understand that bit. I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so.
But it's like, who's organising this? The NFCC is, who's saying, I'm the authority, everyone come here to me?
Okay, so that's really governed by IFATE, which is the Institute for Apprenticeship and Technical Education. They would draw on subject matter experts. So you get people from OFQUAL as well, obviously, as the regulator for the the assessments who we come under, so they regulate us as a endpoint assessment organisation. And obviously they draw in specialists and experts from around the country, and obviously supported by, collated from people like from the NFCC, but also, all of the pool of fire sectors around the country. And it's literally, if you've never been to a trailblazer group, Pete, it really is quite interesting. It's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of like, these are the areas that we need to cover for the roles. So we're looking at the role profiles, and this is, so then you start mashing it up, and obviously people then separate away and they look at the key areas that they need to cover. And you're right, some of the areas, so when we're looking at buildings, so it needs to make sure that it covers that the whole spectrum. So you know that firefighters, we tackle a wide range of emergency situation, problem solving initiatives vital to resolve the incidents. The situations tackle from firefighting, searching, rescuing, protecting people, animals, sustaining, preserving life, and protecting life in the environment. And think about from what different things that we cover, from effects of fire, natural, human disasters, hazmats such as chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosives. We also respond to incidents involving planes, trains, road traffic collisions, and marine incidents. So the wide range of incidents that we actually cover. And then put on top of that, and how we regularly engage with the community to provide information, advice, and guidance to individuals from groups around health and safety and well-being. Firefighters also conduct fire, risk assessments where necessary, audits in businesses and homes. We fit detection, suppression equipment if necessary, and actively contribute to reducing risk. So all those different areas that we cover, how do we assess that? And that's one of the areas that the Trailblazer groups come together. And this isn't just over a couple of days, man. This is over a wide period of time. And these are regularly reviewed. So we regularly review this, and they come up with an assessment plan that covers all the knowledge, skills, and behaviours that we feel are pertinent to a operational firefighter.
So,
and from
to complete the loop, on that first bit, because that there's I feel like there's a missing piece from that origin story of the apprenticeship. So this is managed effectively by I imagine the funding comes to the Department of Education, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because the levy principle, I know very, very vaguely about, and please correct me as I fumble my way through this, but the apprenticeships effectively are, so it comes from trying to maintain skill sets within the UK, doesn't it? So all apprenticeships are funded by a levy. I think large employers I think if a large employer earns or has a turnover of more than 3 million, then they pay into this levy. And anyone can draw down from it. I say anyone that works in a profession that I suppose is perceived as valuable to the UK government. So there's a big pocket of money there. And the appeal from the fire and rescue services is that they can draw down from that levy to support the cost of developing their firefighters. But in order to do so, there has to be an agreement of what good looks like. So therefore, we get these Trailblazer groups to agree what good looks like. Would that be right? Am I connecting the dots-ish there?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's quite a complex. You could quite easily go down rabbit holes and just have a conversation about this. But
just want people to understand why we're even interested in apprenticeships, because people feel like, absolutely. Why are we even doing it though? You're not telling me why we're doing it. We get back to that why. So the why is to help fire and rescue services, A, give people a recognised qualification, but B, draw down some funding and get a standardized approach across the UK. Would they kind of be the three pillars-ish? I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch of stuff there, but
pretty much, yeah. I would agree with you there. That's pretty much the reason why. And what it does, it gives us a framework really to work from, for the apprenticeship. And it's standardized and consistent across the country, ultimately with what we're the leading towards. And so I've worked with the apprenticeship now since 2018, granted not in this role, but from obviously I know we've gone up quite all over the place with my career, but 2018 I ended up back in training in Greater Manchester and running recruits courses 2018, and we heard about this thing called the apprenticeship, and a lot of people say, don't worry, Jimmy, it's exactly the same, things have just changed now and they're now called apprentices. So which was was really wrong at the time, but we didn't have the information that we do now about what the apprentice journey looks like. And this thing called an endpoint assessment, it always seemed like it was this thing way off in the distance that we'd worry about near at the time. And it'd be very real.
I've had the same journey. And then somebody genuinely important who's from an accredited company or accredited organization that really needs you to prove that you're doing this in a standardized, fair, ethical, access to an equal and honest assessment, blah, 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 blah. And this is where with the greatest of respect, the knuckle dragging firefighters and fire services of the UK really let ourselves down because we have our service isms and our brigade isms, and they tend to struggle to withstand the test of, are you doing this properly? And it's not like, oh, Jimmy says they're pretty good, bang them on, say they're competent, give them a tick in the box. And the way I'm sure you've had to go through a whole big development process, as I have myself, in learning how to actually do that properly.
Yeah, it was certainly very different. It was very different. Whereas, from a probationary perspective, whereas if you look at probation as the way that their development looked, and then they would finally get like final assessments that was usually done by a DO or an ADO that would come in and they get them to do something, some different tasks. They'd have a conversation with them and they'd be signed off competent. Now what you have with that's what happened in a lot of fire services for a long period of time, unless that you got your LF qualification, which would supersede it. But whereas now you've got a group of independent assessors that don't know the individuals, aren't part of that service, but are carrying out, as you say, that independent assessment and, are looking at against a standardised assessment plan that's being followed by across the country. So that turned very, very different then. So which led to how the Endpoint Assessment Partnership that I'm working with now, that actually identified that there was a gap within the sector for the Fire and Rescue Service to have its own endpoint assessment organisation with, for the service, by the service as it was.
So how did we able to understand who needed to do this? So there's a couple of different organizations that do this, because the NFCC is also an organization in itself. It does, it does pay people and it does have to get money in and all that sort of stuff. It's not a fire service. And there are other people that do this. So connect the dots for me around, there needs to be someone that is an organization, an accredited organization that's able to award these endpoint assessment apprenticeships. And then there's a bit in the middle where there needs to be a delivery service. And as an example, Capita might be one, but some services are able to deliver it themselves if they're accredited as well. Just help people understand how many people are in this room, how many players are involved in the system, for want of a better description, because not one person can't do it all, because that becomes a monopoly and then it screams of nepotism and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So there's lots of different delivery models for this, Pete, and so I can give you the experiences that I've had working in with different hats on. So when I was in Greater Manchester, we were an employee provider, which means that we employ the actual apprentice, but we also are a training provider. So we provide their training.
A lot of people are trying to do that, aren't they? Because I don't know why, some people have fallen out with the college. They don't like how they're doing it or something like that. But also from a funding perspective, you get places like Manchester's got an amazing training facility. Cheshire's got an amazing training facility. Lancashire, there's a load of great places they're big enough and they have a good enough facility. They can kind of do it themselves. But a lot of services can't because they're so small.
Yeah. And it's not, so what I would say is that is one part of it, but then the infrastructure and the support that's required to support the apprenticeship from a training provider perspective also needs to be there.
Okay.
Obviously they have frequent Ofsted inspections, just like schools.
That's a whole new kettle of fish when they come to you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're used to having HMI inspections, aren't we? Which are very different. But then when Ofsted come in and they're looking at the provision for the apprentice and the support in the learning journey, that is very different than just having your training ADO there observing them on the fireground.
People don't understand you're actually in adult education now. You've changed. You're actually in a whole different swimming pool. This is an ocean now.
It really is. And a lot of people that have jumped in to the employer training provider status, I think that they need to do a lot more research and to think about how they can support that provision.
They need to employ a subject matter expert, probably from the world of education, for the first year to help them get it right.
And a lot of services have. And that's what they've got in place. So they've done their background checks. They've got people potentially. I know services that have got people that used to work for organisations like Ofsted that are in that role, or they're ex-teachers, or so they understand
They're the heads of
education.
a lot of our learning development and whatever different people have the different terms for the department. That's a
Yeah,
lot of green book staff coming into that. Incredibly competent, qualified individuals that really know what needs to be done to do it in the right way.
yeah, they really are. And then there's other services that look at they're the employer, but then they outsource that training provider to companies like Capita to do that for them. So they will train their apprentices up, and they will take them then to the gateway, which is then that learning journey, to support the learning journey of the apprentice, not just on the recruits course, but this is one of the big areas that other people may not be aware of. The apprenticeship starts day one. Not when they land on station. It starts day one when they start that recruit
And
training.
there's a time cap for it as well, isn't there, in the funding thing? Help people understand that,
Yeah,
because
there
it
is.
is a very definitive thing because they declare this is the first day of learning, and the delivery system company, Capita, whoever it might be, come and begin them and
Yeah.
enroll them their first day of learning.
Yeah, they do. And the funding regulations themselves, Pete, when it comes to these sort of things, can be, unless have got your finger on the pulse with it, they can be a minefield as well.
Yeah,
So
they
I
can
don't
run
want to
away
put
from you.
anybody off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to put anybody off by this, but the funding regulations are what you have to adhere to when it comes to the off the job training. There's got to be a specific number, like 20% off the job training that they've got to be able to demonstrate. That the firefighter has done during their apprenticeship. Lots of different things, so they've got to be able to. Functional skills are a key part of this now, Pete. Where that the firefighter has got to get to that level 2 functional skills and demonstrate how they've achieved that prior to actually joining the service, or have achieved functional skills level 2.
What do we,
And
for people that don't understand what functional skills mean, just go
yeah,
elaborate a little bit more for me.
yeah. So what we're looking at is an A to C maths and English would
Yes,
be
because
the
people used to
old
remember O
school.
levels or GCSEs, didn't they? This is now what
Yeah,
we call functional skills.
yeah. So functional skills, yes. So and the word that's another thing that some services are allowing firefighters at the entry level to come in with different levels, and obviously with that expectation that they will be able to take them up to that functional skills level 2, which is another
Yeah,
challenge.
they have to agree to complete it within 6 months or a year or something, and then they'll provide another training. But that, again, what we need to remember there is you're placing another cognitive load and another responsibility onto that person who is already doing a full firefighter apprenticeship. So that can be a risk as well. But also, you don't want to limit great firefighters joining services just because they maybe had a really challenging childhood, or they went to a crap school, or they just had some challenges they couldn't overcome that mean they haven't got those requisite skills. But they probably will make for great firefighters. But it's a gamble as well, because they do have to achieve that.
Yes, they do. Yeah, and so they can't come to endpoint assessment unless they've got those
I've seen it,
qualifications.
mate. I've seen a
So
few have missed their endpoint assessments, had to have them pushed back because they thought it was like, I'm doing really well with my firefighter apprenticeship. Right, have you done your functional English? Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm getting around to it, and I've emailed the person, and I'm like, you are not giving this the focus it needs. If you don't pass that, you will not get competent. You will not get your pay. You will not pass your apprenticeship. And that's something I'll probably talk to you about in a minute. Like, what happens if they don't get the thing? Because there's only so many times, and that's services are doing it all differently themselves, aren't they?
they are, yeah, and that's a challenge. The apprenticeship is full on for the for the individuals. That they are being well supported by their line managers, by the L&D departments. They have workplace tutors in different services that go out to support that. It could be from an external company, like we've mentioned before with Capita, or it could be somebody internally that's supporting them on that learning journey. Now, to put into that on top of that they've got to potentially achieve a level 2 in functional skills like maths and English that they may not have touched. So we've got apprentices now that are coming in their 30s and a little bit older in some instances that may not have looked at maths and English for a long time. And, so to add that into the mixture, into the melting pot, if you will, that, actually now that, they're having to spread themselves, and it can be quite a challenge, and I have empathy for the apprentices that are coming through that, because
adult
that's not.
literacy and numerical literacy is a real thing. I see it a lot, even just parents of my children's friends when they're trying to help them with their maths homework. It's like, and this is a shame because there's incredible people that may have done 10 years in the care sector, in accounting, as a builder, ex-military or whatever, and they're coming in because it used to be a cut-off age in a lot of services of 31, but now that's gone, hasn't it? So you can join in your late 30s and your 40s, but that student mindset is difficult to get back into. It's a learned behavior. You've got to. It's different. It's very hard. Adult education, people going, it takes a great deal of humility. I have such respect for people doing that, but it is hard.
I couldn't agree, Pete. I couldn't agree more. So I've had apprentices come through where English is a second language as well.
Yeah.
Okay. They haven't the functional skills. Now, I'm sure you'll appreciate learning the fire service sort of analogies, and we could have a conversation in abbreviations. Okay.
So we love a TLA, a 3-letter acronym. We love a good TLA, buddy.
Yeah, in acronyms. We could just have a conversation in acronyms. So therefore, you're learning a new language when you come into the fire service with all our acronyms and terminologies, let alone then having to, when people are learning where English is a second language, and they're translating things in their mind to understand, and then they're trying to translate it into the fire service speak. There's a lot of things going on.
And IT literacy. So much of it is online now, and you've got you log in, you log in your assessments or your evidence, and your blah blah blah. Some people haven't got some like read write software or support in their IT ability. We're so used to kids these days, and we're like, oh, give them a laptop, they'll smash it. But some people are like scared of them. They're like, trying to bring your laptop to work today. No, I was given that on day one. It's just been in my locker, to be honest, the last 6 months. What the fuck? You've got to use it, but you may not have trained them how to use it. And this is all stuff we need to be adding into people's development, into their inductions, into not just assuming, I'll give you all the stuff, go and do the thing. Well, I don't fucking know how to use a computer.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you're putting a lot of emphasis and a lot of pressure on some of these individuals that there is almost an expectation. Oh yeah, we'll give them the tablet, crack on, you'll be able to work. Where actually, and then when we add into something into the melting pot, neurodiversity and neurodivergence, that we spend a lot of time on, now in the assessment arena, and that we need to consider. We have got, there's a lot of things going on for new individual that's coming into this role, and there being the expectations placed on them, let alone, Pete, learning to be a competent firefighter.
I'm banging my head against a BA lead from another organization at the minute, where they're doing a BA1 safe to ride, and they are insistent that they have to sit an exam. And I said, why do they have to? And I know people will think this is bullshit or I'm just making it, but I'm genuine conversations I'm having with this person, much older than me, much more experienced, blah, blah, blah. Well, debatable. But anyway, he said, I need to know that they know it. And I said, that's different. That's your why. And I agree with your why, but I have issue with your how. Yeah. You're getting them to sit a written assessment, but that's not what you just said.
Yeah.
You said, I need to know they can do it. Or he says, I haven't got time to set up practical assessments for all the aspects of BA, but I need to know that they know it so that they're safe. I said, you can't have your cake and eat it too, mate, because you're asking people to sit a written assessment. They might actually know the thing. Yeah. But you're asking them to interpret it through a manner in when the fuck are you ever going to be asked as an operational firefighter, tell you what, after at the incident, can you just write down everything I want you to do? Because you want to see me do the thing. As long as I can do the thing, it doesn't matter if I can spell it right. And I know, but people struggle with that. And they're like, no, we've always done written assessments. There's never been an issue. There has been an issue with it in the past. You just don't realize there's been an issue because you had a big enough pool of people that the people that couldn't read and write, you said they're not a good egg, they won't make a good firefighter, get rid of them. But that was wrong. Yeah. And now you're going to lose great people, and you haven't got an abundant pool of other people. And because you're still stuck, you're romantically stuck to this idea that they've got to sit a written assessment. And it really grinds me. But anyway, sorry, I'm going off down a little passionate rabbit hole. Get off my soapbox.
There are so many ways of gleaning information from people, and you can do that, like you just mentioned, then by actually getting them to do it or actually talk about why they do what they do.
But I get
So
it's a
they can get in
resources
that
aspect as
understanding.
well. An exam is a sheep dip, isn't it?
It is.
That's the helpfulness
Yeah,
of it. You know, you could, I haven't got time to give a one-to-one conversation. Well, do it or don't do it. You know, you as a service need to recognize the importance of this. It's either important or it's not important. It's not important only when it's convenient. It's either important or it's not important. Yeah, you can't keep doing this, and it really, I've done it again. Sorry, really, really annoys me. Sorry, mate.
But
Go on,
ultimately,
take me
we
away
want
from this, for God's sake. Otherwise,
no,
I'll bore everyone to death.
no, not at all, because it's so important that that we want the best people, and they come from the whole wide society, diverse society that we currently live in.
Yeah.
And we want we want people, well-rounded individuals, but we've got to support people on that journey. We've talked about this for the last 20 minutes now, about supporting people on that development journey. That when we first went into this world of apprenticeships, that one of the first things that somebody said to me at the time was, Jimmy, don't worry about it, it's just another word for a probationer. And when you actually start looking into this, and I was leading the recruits course at this time, we were going through an accelerated recruits campaign in Manchester, and we had groups of 36, 36, 55 on recruits courses. That was in 1 year. And
when when everyone says something like accelerated, that always worries me a bit. What does that mean?
Yeah. So basically, from my experience and from my perspective, it was that we went through a period from around 2010 around to about 2016 in a lot of services where we didn't take any active recruitment.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, numerous reasons, political reasons, etc., etc. There was very limited.
Well, legally, we couldn't go over budgets as well. People don't realize this. Even if you're having 30 people retire in 2 years' time, you can't start employing people yet till you stop paying them, because you can't go over budget. People don't realize that the chief fire officer will go to jail if they don't manage. As an exaggeration, but if they don't, they have to. They cannot. It's not like your own personal business where you're like, well, I see this coming down the pipe. I'm going to take a hit this year, make my money back next year because I know he's leaving or I know she's leaving. You can't do that. So people wonder, why have we waited so long to do this? You're like, we couldn't do it before. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, there's always reasons and there's always explanations and rationale for why we do what we do. However, what we couldn't stop at that time is you don't slow down your retirement profile, Pete.
No.
So you are losing all that knowledge, those skills, those experiences, and they're all going out the door. Okay. And now what you're getting is a vacuum of skills and experiences. So, we're talking about operational firefighters now that, we're losing very competent and all that knowledge and experience that we're losing. And we then identified that actually we've got a shortfall and we've got to plug that shortfall. And as I just mentioned, we went through this period of time, and a lot of services are still going through it now post COVID, I'm sure we'll get on to, where we had gaps and significant gaps. And if you think about training schools of 36, 55 individuals that all needed that level of support, individually, they all had their own backgrounds where they needed different things to support them on that learning journey. We're not just talking about an apprenticeship of 15 weeks or whatever how long the recruits courses are across the country. We're talking about a 2-year now period that people need that support. All right. So it's not a case of
workload, that is.
Yeah. It's huge. And that doesn't stop. So just because they land on station, they continually need that support to take them, towards this new.
And their line managers need the support because they don't understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And this was one of the things that we identified when we carried out that risk assessment, that when I was in Manchester, this is great. So I'm in training, I'm in L&D, I understand this apprenticeship thing. What I have got now is I've got 55 people off one group that are going out to 55 different line managers that don't understand what this apprenticeship was. They understood what NVQs were because they went through that experience. They understood what this IPS journey was, PDS journey, and NOS, and they knew what all these different development things were, and the probation of the firefighter was. But this new apprenticeship thing, what does that mean? How can I support my apprentice effectively?
Like
And
we're
they
busy,
are
busy, 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 head down in our learning development, training development organizations. And then we kick them over the fence into the
yeah.
operational world and they land there and someone looks at them and goes, well, that's different. What am I supposed to do with
What
this?
what do I do with this? What do I do with this? This is different. And unless they are the people that the apprentice will always turn to first.
And they
And
are
so they're
incredible. They've got the knowledge. They can help them. They're amazing line managers, but we've got to
massively
help them know what
brilliant.
to
And
do.
they are We do. And so, therefore, we've got to support. I'm a big advocate that support doesn't just come from the top down, but it also comes from the shop floor.
Yeah.
And if you educate the line managers, your crew and watch managers, these very experienced, very knowledgeable individuals, but if you support them to take them, to put the apprentice under their wing, so to speak, and say, this is what we're leading towards, and this is what the final point is, and this is how I'm going to take you on this journey. Well, actually, what you find is then that the apprentice feels supported, not only by the organisation, by L&D, but also from the team around them. That and this is where mentorship from an experienced firefighter, or even as we're finding now, Pete, is that we've got apprentices that have gone through this journey. They come out the other end, and now they're becoming the new apprentices. Mentors, because they're supporting them, because they've
That's
been
what
through
I'm
that
doing.
journey.
So on their inductions, I bring apprentices from the last cohort who have just come back from their initial acquisition of skills, and then the cohort before, which have just passed the apprenticeships, and they do about a 3-hour presentation, sit down, talk, because they've had all the waffle and the talk from bloody HR and accounting and all that stuff that's not really going to remotely help them unless they're about to get sacked, which hopefully they're nowhere near. And then they actually get some useful stuff from people that have already traveled their journey. They've already gone through the fog they're about to head into and said, no, there is land on the other side. I'm stood here. This is the path I took. Here's some tips.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of services don't have a lead for apprenticeships, though. I speak to a lot of services across the UK. They don't have an apprenticeship lead. Some of them because they're not big enough. And I think that's a real miss because there's the external company and there's the external accrediting company. But then there's no one in that service who's the bridge.
It's vital. It's
It
vital.
is.
So
Yeah.
when I was, I can only explain from my own experiences. I was in Manchester and I was looking after the recruits course, and we identified very quickly that whilst we had Green Book members of staff, they're fantastic people looking at from the L&D perspective. What about the apprentices' developmental journey from the operational firefighter perspective? Who's looking after that? And how do we bridge the gap between the L&D elements, and when we're looking at all the provisions and obviously the requirements that we needed from Ofsted and the funding regulations, the funding rules, all these sort of things, but who's going to support that standardized, consistent development across the service now, right, to take them to this gateway?
Yeah.
And so I put my hand up and I said, we don't have anybody that's looking after them across the sector, across the service. So by this time, we had probably in the pipeline close on 150 to 200 apprentices.
Wow.
That we're moving towards this thing called an endpoint assessment that none of us in the service had been through.
Yeah.
We didn't really know what it looked like, apart from having this document that was called an assessment plan.
And then you've got all the line managers with the best of intentions, leading them all in 20 or 150, 200 different directions, with the best of intentions. And then they all arrive at this gateway, and some people turn up with different stuff and different things and different plans and different types of evidence. And they all go, oh, God, I thought we were all heading towards the same place. Where the bloody hell have you gone? I went via bloody Derby. I went via Tenerife. You're like, Jesus, I thought we were all following the same thing.
Absolutely. So this was one of the things that we identified. And what we didn't want is Greater Manchester is such a huge area geographically that you've got some people on one side of the county and one side of the gate that potentially don't know people and serve, watches on the other side.
I think of London and Scotland. God, Scotland's massive. Now it's 4 services into one. Jesus, you could be 100 miles away from each other.
Yeah, you can, and, different watches, different areas, they've never met. So therefore, when you're looking at how we want the progression and how we're going to monitor that progression of the firefighters, well, unless we periodically have that review to sort of have that holistic overview of how that development's looking, Well, how can we then make sure that when it comes to this endpoint assessment that we know we've got, that development journey has been the same or consistent for each of our apprentices on that route? So we looked back. So it could be a minefield, Pete, for services. So what we introduced periodic assessments where we would bring our firefighters back in, and we would monitor their development centrally. So, we brought in the things that 12-month assessments that was carried out. We brought that into, to look where their development was. And then we also introduced, workplace tutors going out to support, to have conversations with line managers, sitting, having chats with them, against and with the apprentice, just looking at how their development pathway was, where they were up to, how they were finding things, did they need any further support? Because a lot of times people won't raise their hand up and say, I need some support, unless you ask them and you're talking to them.
Oh, some line managers won't let them either. Some line managers will think that's a reflection on them not doing their job properly, but that's not what it is. This is not an accusation. It's an offer of help and support.
It's an offer of support. It is. It's that olive branch that a lot of people need, but sometimes they don't realise that they need until you actually bring it up, and have that conversation with them. So thinking about that developmental journey, it was also a journey for all our line managers. And I would also include station managers on station to this point, that obviously if they're going to be in some sort of quality assurance role, overviewing, then they need to know what they're assessing against, and they need to know the sort of the standard that we're talking about. So we introduced quite a few different teams conversations, where we brought people in, through Zoom calls, to talk, to try to capture the audience, as many people as we could, to talk them through this apprentice journey and where we wanted them to get to, readiness for this endpoint assessment. So we also then thought, right, well, from a competency perspective, you mentioned before that every service does something slightly different, and obviously from an endpoint assessment perspective, we're looking at them holistically, and I'll move on to what we're looking at in the assessments shortly. Yes. Internally, in service, when we introduced something called the practical gateway assessment. So the gateway, for those people who don't know what the assessment much about the endpoint assessment and the apprentice journey is, that the apprentices are required, or this is what they had to do back then. They had to provide certain pieces of evidence. They had to achieve their level 2 functional skills in maths and English, and this was all then sent to the endpoint assessment organisation to review. However, we as a service, we weren't sure. We wanted to know, against our own policies and procedures, we wanted to carry out a competency assessment internally to know that, we had competent firefighters internally before we allowed an external organisation, an external body to review, to make sure our apprentices were ready for this. So we brought them in.
That's a big point I'd love to expand on, because other services are doing that differently. Like some services will attach their pay rise, as an example, to their internal competency assessment. So they're like, once you've done our assessment in Manchester or whatever, then we deem you competent, you get your pay rise. And then you go on and do your apprenticeship assessment. But, and this is my own experience, in some services, they go, it doesn't really matter if you pass your apprenticeship, actually, because we've done it. We've drawn the funding down. If you fail your endpoint assessment, doesn't really matter. Some people are sacking them, though. Some people are saying, if you don't pass your endpoint assessment, that's game over. So there is stuff happening different as well there. And that's just from my personal experiences. Please tell me that's rubbish and you hear different if that's the case for you. But I've seen that in different services.
Every service does something slightly differently.
Yeah.
And this is one of the biggest things that was going to come out of our conversation, Pete, is that the experience that I've had working with different services, that they all do something slightly differently. Now, what we decided at the time in Manchester is that obviously from a competent perspective, from competent pay, things may have evolved now, but certainly when I'm looking back to 2019, 2020, when we were having these conversations, was when are the firefighters going to get this competent pay?
Yeah.
And what we decided was, because these gateway assessments that we were doing, everybody was doing it on a different date. And also because of the numbers, the endpoint assessment wasn't done all on the 1st of February. Mm-hmm. Because of the numbers, we would have smaller groups and it could be stretched over a 6-week period. So what it was, what we identified, that once the apprentices have been successful at endpoint assessment, that pay award was backdated to the gateway decision day. So then everyone will be paid competent rate, but it was backdated to that date. So therefore, there was, there was nobody getting something,
So
earlier
it
than
still
anybody
held the
else.
value of passing the endpoint assessment. It's still relevant that they complete their apprenticeship,
Yeah,
but they weren't unfairly
they were
treated
being paid.
just because of the logistical challenges of when they get to do it.
Absolutely. Which we thought was the fairest
Yeah,
way
100%. Yeah.
of doing that. And I mean, as I say, things may have evolved somewhat now, but certainly, because obviously me being seconded out of the organisation, I haven't got my finger on the pulse as it was, directly, but that certainly was what we decided was the most fair way to deal with things at the time. And I think that the apprentices bought into that and they understood that. And, we didn't have any sort of challenge on that because it was the fairest thing to do. Other services are looking at things slightly differently, and I'm sure they've all got their own reasons for that.
So take us to these elusive endpoint assessments. We keep teasing people and so a lot of people will have experienced them, but there'll be a lot of managers listening in that genuinely want to know, what are my firefighters going to be asked to do? My learning development team, T&D team, whatever team, training school. They're not talking to me. They're not telling me what I need to know. I don't want to set my person up for failure. What are they actually going to be asked to do on these days?
So when I've mentioned before, and I kept teasing about this endpoint assessment plan, and within there are knowledge, skills, and behaviours that we will be assessing against. And as an endpoint assessment organisation, we review them and we look at the best way that we can assess against these knowledge, skills, and behaviours. There's practical assessments, which are split into 3 different areas, and again, this is within the assessment plan. And the assessment plan itself, Pete, has evolved. We're on version 1.2 now. And it is actually subject for a review towards the back end of this year.
Okay.
So we're constantly reviewing it to make sure it's fit for purpose for the sector, as I said before. But as it currently stands, the practical assessment is broken down into a BA scenario, into we have a road traffic collision scenario, and we also have a hazmat scenario. Now, within all those areas, what we want a real world environment. We want it to be a complete immersive experience where you are given a situation and basically a scenario brief for each one of these instances to create that immersion, to create that buy-in experience, because we don't throw any curveballs in. Long gone are the days where there would be a Hercules flying over and acetylene cylinders would be dropped on the incident. There's no shark
custard.
Yeah, there's no shark infested custard. There's none of this. It's actual real world experiences because we want to see what the firefighters would do on an operational incident. Okay, so that's the practical day, and we can talk about the actual
if we can go into a little bit of the detail about those, because there's things, again, because you make it standardized, not you, but because the assessing organizations have to standardize it across the UK, there's differences in resources, isn't there? There's have you got a gas rig, you got a carbonaceous rig, is it synthetic smoke?
What we ask for is we have a resource list that we provide to each one. We have a really good working relationship with all our employers, with all our customers, employer training providers, and each one of them will get documentation. They all have access to all our policies and procedures. One of them is our employer training provider guidance document. That is basically their holy grail that they will go to, and everything that they need to know about the endpoint assessment is contained within there. We have hyperlinks to mock tests for the apprentices to use, so they get a feel for what our actual assessments look like. And also within there, we have a comprehensive resource list. These are the things that we need on your fire engines to be able to conduct our practical assessments. It's very clear, it makes sure that we've got everything that is needed. Also, the apprentices get a guidance document as well, so it talks them through. It basically holds their hand and engages them through that endpoint assessment journey from start to finish, from gateway.
Do they receive a guidance document? I'm challenging you now.
Say again, sorry.
When do they receive that?
So what we have is we have a SharePoint site, and we ask that when it comes after the gateway decision day, that the employer provides, and that's part of our, that's part of the service level agreement that we have with them, that they actually provide that to the apprentices so it can be downloaded, or if they want, then they can ask us, and we have in the past, we've sent that out to all the apprentices, and we ensure that they have access to that.
I think you
Because not
should
only
do that always yourself, just as a bit of feedback, because I think some of the services are dropping the ball there from my own personal experiences.
so this is one of the things, Pete. So I'll move
I
on
know
to
it's
in a
control
minute.
the controllables. You guys and girls can only do so much. They have to take accountability and responsibility for doing that. But
Yeah.
ultimately, the person that pays the price is the apprentice if the service is a bit too busy or doesn't remember to do the thing.
So yeah, absolutely, I do appreciate that. I do appreciate what you're saying there. Is that we want the apprentice to be as comfortable and as confident as they possibly can. And again, that talks about that what the endpoint assessment looks like, how it's going to feel, and it gives them that link again to the knowledge test in there, and it walks and talks them through. This is what's going to happen on this time. This is going to be the first day, what we'll do on the practical day, and then the second day is split into the professional discussion and the knowledge test. They're the three different areas. So you've got practical assessment, you have the professional discussion, and you have a knowledge test or a multi-choice test. So they're the three areas that we cover.
Are we allowed to go into the detail of what's actually involved in the practical assessments? Just because I was alluding to the BA analogy there and wanting to understand what you haven't got to give me an OIC brief here. I'm just saying, because some services, I say, want to make it as realistic as possible, but not all services can offer that. So you've got to strike the balance somewhere, haven't you?
You really do. So what we want to do is we want to, we've got to make sure it's standardized and consistent. So therefore, we try to do that. We will do the same thing, because ultimately, if they're getting that assessment, that certificate that says that they've passed their apprenticeship, and they should be very proud of once you've achieved that actually it's been the same process that they've been through.
Yeah.
That's something that's really important. So to put it into context, that one of our scenario briefs would be, we've set the building up, and we would work with the service, whether that's, and we obviously have a robust risk assessment process that we need to follow, that we provide again to the services. About what our needs are and what we will carry out that due diligence as well. But it's usually we do it where it's so we've got to think about contaminants as well. So we try to do it with either obscuration or in darkness. So it means that the assessors aren't going in and out of a contaminated area as well. So they're not under breathing apparatus, but we can actually break down the scenario. So it is in what we're looking at really is the basic fundamentals of, are they competent to do what they need to do against the standard.
So they don't do it in smoke?
No, we don't do it in smoke, in heat or smoke. No, not at the moment, no. And therefore, that's why, and I mentioned before about the competency assessment in service. A lot of services, I know that Greater Manchester do their gateway assessment, and that will be carried out in heat and smoke.
Yeah, it's just people will just be getting they won't from the accrediting organisations. They'll be getting the same treatment, and I agree. And again, it just comes back to the funding and the size and this, that, and the other, because some services just don't have the facility to do certain things.
Yeah, they don't, and it is unfortunate they just don't. So it would be unfair on an apprentice that if we went to one training centre and it was all carbonaceous heat and smoke in BA. And obviously, breathing apparatus is only one small element of it.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas, when we look at, it has to be consistent. So, and everything that we're assessing against, Pete, is against the assessment plan. We're not assessing against, the breakdown of what potentially you as a BAI would be looking at. We're making sure that they cover everything within that assessment plan and each one of those assessments. So
I imagine the RTC is easier to standardise.
It really is. So, I mean, a lot of the times they're given a scenario where RTC, two vehicles involved, we've got a person strapped. There may be also a casualty under the vehicle that would be an immediate release. So, and actually, what we try to do to create that immersion is they'll, potentially, what I'm hoping that would do is that they would move the casualty from underneath a vehicle and actually carry out CPR, like first aid, trauma care on immediately. So we would replace the dummy, the dummy with like a resuscital that actually we have the training trauma pack, and they would carry out that emergency intervention with them. immediately, just to create that immersion. So then, because in all the years that I've been a firefighter, I've never come across somebody that's got a hook in the back of the, in the back of the jumper that they just dragged out, So
Mate, I've got a big issue around the weight of casualties that I'll not bore you with, but I think it's rubbish. I think it's horrific that we use 55 and even 35 kilogram dummies in casualties in some services now. I don't think that's remotely realistic. I think you're setting not you, but I think we're setting people up to fail in the fact that we're only training with these really light, less than 10 stone dummies. Most people that get stuck in fires are heavy, people of poor health, elderly, people of reduced mobility. They are not often 9 stone children, and that's just a personal frustration.
Well, the average,
sorry, go on.
I understand what you're saying there. And when I was running back, when I was in BA, and when I was looking at it from that perspective, internally training, I was looking at that very much so in that way as well, because the average weight of a person now exceeds 12 stone.
Yeah, our waistline is getting bigger in the UK and everywhere across the world. Not everywhere across the world, but certainly in the Western world. So our training needs to adapt and reflect that. But anyway, we're going down that rabbit hole. So
really does.
Do we do pumping assessment? Because I think a lot of these endpoint assessments I've observed don't do a pumping assessment.
Okay, so what we are looking at when we look at the skills. So what I would, anyone that's listening to today, the one document that I want you to look at, if you get the opportunity to go onto the
make it available to us. Can you give us a link? If you can, I'll put it in the notes for the presentation and make it easier for people to find it.
I will, yes, so I absolutely will. I want everyone to look at the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education document, and it's the Endpoint Assessment Plan for Operational Firefighter Apprenticeship Standard. I want everyone to be aware of that, because everything within this document is what any endpoint assessment organisation has to assess against. We're recognised and we're regulated by OFQUAL. And OFQUAL will look at all these knowledge, skills and behaviours, and what they do is they want to see is how do we assess against what it says in this document. And when it comes to the practical assessment with questioning, there are several different areas that we must assess against. And when you break it down even further, Pete, there are things called grading descriptors, which are your pass criteria, or fail criteria, your pass criteria, and your distinction criteria. Yeah, that we are assessing against. It's not Jimmy thinks this is a good idea that we assess against this. This is exactly what we assess against.
I like to see people do an LPP. Well, that's not in the thing, or it is in the thing. So it's like, I don't care what you like or don't like from your firefighters. This conversation's already been had. This is what we do.
With all due respect, that's massively irrelevant what you like.
Yeah,
it is. So when we look at, so I know we were mentioning BA before. The criteria within the BA, the skills that we're assessing against, is operating hazardous environments using breathing apparatus. Okay, so that's what we're actually assessing against, and then we can break that down further into the grading descriptors that I mentioned before. But it doesn't say that needs to be in heat and smoke. It says operating in hazardous environments using breathing apparatus. So when we look at that, we can break that down in lots of different ways. So when you look at the skills from the practical element, Pete, which talks about carry out safe working practices in accordance with relevant legal requirements. Yes, there are underpinning elements to that, but that's what we're looking at. Operate safely and effectively in emergency situations. Operate within a command and control system. And then obviously we can move on. Safely resolve incidents involving hazardous materials. Safely work at height. Extricate casualties from situations of entrapment. So when we talked about the apprenticeship not just being for local authority, okay, that we could, for example, say, well, if you look at S8, extricate casualties from situations of entrapment, you may get fire and rescue service that doesn't go to road traffic collisions. So therefore, that working alongside said employers, we need to come up with scenarios which suits their environment. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Use and maintain specialist equipment. The specialist equipment that you may have in Leicester is very different than the equipment that they would have in the Royal Air Force. But we're still assessing against the same standard. So when people potentially might not understand the reason and the rationale, but these are the confines, this is what we're assessing against. All right, and the way that we can tease out a lot of that is, so we would instigate the scenario, all the apprentices will get to work, and the assessors stand back. Our way of dealing with things is we would provide the incident commander, and one of my colleagues, Stu, who works with me very closely, he orchestrates and he runs each one of these practical days really well. And by having that consistent incident commander, they orchestrate the scenarios, and they know the areas that the assessors need to see. So all our assessors, I'm going around a little bit around the room here with this one, Pete. So I do apologize.
No, absolutely, mate.
All our assessors have got GoPros on, and we have a maximum. The assessment plan talks about a maximum 4-to-1 ratio, so meaning that each assessor could be assigned 4 apprentices to assess during the practical observations. For me, I think 4-to-1 is a bit of a stretch. That's our honest opinion, and that's my opinion. Because I mean, you're training to try and observe and assess 4 people in any given scenario. When you're trying to create immersion, it's a realistic, incident, is very difficult to observe all these people at the same time. So we maximize it. We have a cap it at 3-to-1. So all our scenarios, then all our the apprentices are given a tabard, a coloured tabard, where that's like a red tabard, orange tabard, green tabard with numbers on as well. So they're very distinguishable on the fireground during the scenarios. And we explain all this prior to it as well during the safety briefs and our, in the beginning of the first day. And each one of the assessors is also given a GoPro camera to capture everything, because overall, the assessment plan, again, I keep referring back to this assessment plan, Pete, it talks about 6 hours of practical scenarios.
Okay.
In the day. So 6 hours of practical scenarios is a lot to capture. And it's very easy, it can be, when you're looking back then and you're making an assessment decision on this apprentice, and you're looking at your grading descriptors, did they quite cover all those areas for the distinction criteria? Or, it gives the assessor that real good opportunity to review, going back through each scenario. Apprentice A, I saw that now, where potentially they may have missed it because they were observing the other apprentice, for example. So we capture it for that perspective, but also it's used for auditing and also for any potential appeals that may come through as well. So we actually, the way that the scenarios work is, like I said, it is immersive, and we try to make it as realistic as possible, but we have to assess against the knowledge, skills and behaviours. Once the assessment's finished, the assessment plan requires us to ask underpinning questions. So there's different different questions that we would ask, and asks us that the EPAR would to provide a bank of questions that the assessor must ask, but also then the assessor can ask underpinning questions to check understanding. Why did you do what you did? What was your rationale for doing this? Why did you, on your BA search, for example, you identified there was another external route out, out of the building? Why did you use that to take casualty out, rather than going all the way back to the beginning? That's a very simple process.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Understand that they can at least elaborate on the why, because again, you might have just done the right thing by accident. You might have just fluked it. But if you can demonstrate, but equally, you might have done something that to us, from our limited view and understanding and perspective, was like, that's weird. Why did they do that? But you may have observed something different. Your interpretation, your perception of the environment would have led you to a rational decision, but you just need to explain that for me. Just unfold your decision-making process there.
Absolutely. And a lot of times that'll be like, what a brilliant thought. That's brilliant.
One of the things I have seen certain apprentices struggle with, is this aspect of reduced direction. For an example, the people that facilitate these things are not allowed to coach, guide, or train those individuals, which can be disorientating for people in such infancy of their career, when they're used to have been led and directed quite closely by their trainers, instructors, and incident commanders up to that point. What advice would you give to people on that? And certainly for perhaps line managers trying to prepare their firefighters for these endpoint assessments?
Okay. What I would say is a lot of that comes down to the skills of the facilitator themselves. So we have undertaken well over 500 assessments now, Pete, and we have the dedicated roles of that on-site facility. The incident commander facilitator role is really important. They have a really good understanding of the assessment plan and each one of our scenarios, and they can orchestrate the scenarios in such way that they would put the apprentices into an environment. And if we're going to say, let's give an example of a road traffic collision, because I think this is the simplest analogy. That we've got a casualty, we've ascertained that the casualty's got a physical entrapment by the dash. Okay, so they would gather that it may be that we've got three apprentices working around one side of the vehicle. The vehicle has been stabilized, they've managed the glass effectively, and now we're coming to that plan phase and we're looking at how they're going to, carry out this extrication. And we'll say, right then, team. So we've got a physical entrapment by the dash. Any thoughts? And it's about gleaning the information from the apprentices. All right, then, boss, so we're going to need to carry out our B or our emergency plan. Every service calls things slightly different, even in RTC world, Pete. And they'll say, right, we need to carry out this B plan. Okay, so what's that then? All right, well, that means that we're going to have to release, release that entrapment before, in case a casualty was to, medical condition was to deteriorate, we can get them out safely. Okay, so explain what we can do for that. And then, so going around the room or, around this group, you'll say, right, I need to take the door off.
So that's a paused conversational style, almost like a professional discussion to allow people to demonstrate their knowledge in those moments. Again, painting a greater picture to the actions they're about to undertake.
It is, but that's not something our assessors do. The incident commander would say, okay, so you need to take the door off. All right, but then what do we need to do? Right, well, so we're going to have to carry out a dashboard roll, for example. Okay, so what's that then? So then they talk them through the sequence of that. Okay, then, team, any questions? No? Get to work. So what they have done is they have led them on that journey but they haven't told them what to do. The apprentices have come up with the solution themselves. And the facilitator has been that springboard of information. Okay, so we're happy with what we're doing, right? Let's get to work. And so,
what if they do just suggest something completely weird, like, I'm thinking we're just going to smash that front window and pull them out the window?
That hasn't happened yet,
and you wouldn't expect it to either. But stranger things have happened at sea.
Yeah, they have. So what we would try to say is, okay, so what would be the benefits of that?
Okay, and calibrated questions.
So we would, and that's why it's so important for us as an EPAO that facilitator completely understands the objective of the scenario from our perspective and what we want to see. So we can orchestrate the scenarios in such a manner that without impacting or sort of putting any without any without directing them and holding the hand to achieve the objective, we can certainly orchestrate that scenario to ensure that each one of our assessors has seen what they need to see against the standard to make sure that and it's sufficient that they've covered all the different areas within the time frame allotted, which is 2 hours for each practical assessment, plus or minus 10%.
2 hours is a bit long for a bloody RTC, though. That's the problem. And this is one of my challenges when I've seen some of these things take place. You have to, because of the structure of the accrediting organization, I would imagine you have to have observed them for this 6 hour period. But that might kind of go against when I see things like, are you aware of the exit project?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the exit project and move into a more rapid extrication of casualties. That will be a lot of the training that's being proliferated and, working its way down the channels to these individuals. And they may very well start coming up with solutions that only take them 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because that'd be great for the community and for the individual stuck in that vehicle.
Absolutely. So what we're aware of, so the way that we set up our scenarios that they've got that we will have casualties with various medical conditions to make sure that we are seeing what we need to see. So then, if we're just constantly carrying out snatch rescues, but we would put physical barriers, like, for example, like we're saying, that the casualty is physically trapped.
Okay.
But each one of our scenarios will include a comprehensive brief, monitoring, debrief, and questions at the end.
Okay.
There's a lot of elements to it, because obviously from a safety perspective as well, that we've got to give them adequate rest time between each scenario. We will brief them on the scenarios as well. We'll allow them to carry out the scenario, and actually we'll carry out the debriefing as well. And that includes the makeup, because obviously all the apprentices are also assessed in the makeup of the equipment to make sure that they are properly dressed, the PPE and all this sort of thing.
Most of the injuries happen, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And yet, you see, even on firegrounds, firefighters, the helmets aren't done up, they're perhaps not wearing gloves, etc.
Yeah.
So that's why, it's that professionalism of ensuring, that actually they are mitigating those risks. So 2 hours, they seem quite a long time. And yes, if you've got limited personnel, what we don't want to do is, I don't want to start over-assessing people, Pete, to the point of, well, we're assessing them until they fail. That's not what this is about at all.
No, yeah.
We assess them until the objective is achieved. So, it's really important that we can assess them in lots of different areas, so that was just the RTC, but within the RTC scenario, one of the areas that we assess verbally as well is, so we assign the K-12 how to carry out treatment to casualty. This will include basic life support and casualty handling. So that underpinning questioning we would ask as part of that process. So they're dealing with casualties, and at the end, they're the questions that we would ask, because they've just dealt with a casualty and they've done the practical element of, all casualty handling, because it is, it's a casualty centered approach. And that's what we're ultimately after. So the other areas that we would ask is how to use personal and respiratory protective equipment in hazardous environments. We assign that to the breathing apparatus scenario, or the like the person's reported scenario, because it just organically suits to go with that scenario. And the final one, how to operate communication technology systems, e.g. MDTs and radios. Well, if you're gathering information around a hazardous material scenario, then naturally the first port of call in a lot of instances would be going on your MDT and looking up things like.
Do you have hazmats as one of your scenarios?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Do they all have to do it now? Because I think all the other organisations that also carry out endpoint assessments have a hazmat involved in it. Yeah. And it tends to go less smoothly than some of the other ones, because hazmat is a bit of a black box for some people, and it's just a bit weird in the way some services carry it out. Not weird, it's just different, but it tends to be a lot of hurry up and wait, two people doing something, everyone else standing around doing nothing, in my personal experience of hazmat training and incidents operationally.
What I would say is that if you were to ask Jimmy, obviously this is my opinions on this, is that the requirements within the assessment plan is safely resolve incident involving hazardous materials such as chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive substances. These will be resolved by stopping further harm, then removing of and clearing up of the substance. All right. Now, firefighters 2 years into their role are certainly not hazmat officers. They're not HMEPOs. They're not DIM officers. They're not, right? They're not. Okay, so we've got to look at the level that they're currently operating at and what the expectations would be of a crew of 5 people at that 2-year mark and what they would be capable of.
Because they are not going to be making those decisions. Like you say, they might contribute to a tactical plan at an RTC, but they're not going to contribute to a tactical plan of how to deal with this chemical. They're going to be told what to do, and they're going to do it, unless it's really stupid and dangerous, in which case they'll probably say no, or they should say no.
So what we look at is what are they going to be dealing with on a daily basis that, that is what one fire engine could deal with in a manner. And that would be level 1 decontamination style scenarios. All right, and it's always been a passion of mine that level 1 decontam, it doesn't have to be if you ask somebody what is a hazard, well, a hazard is something with potential to cause harm. Okay, so if you look at it from that perspective, every incident that we go to as a firefighter is we're going to a hazardous material or a hazardous material incident in theory. If you look at it from a hazard is something with potential to cause harm. So therefore, we look at our scenario to make sure that it is appropriate and proportionate to one fire engine turning up, and what could they deal with safely.
Because you could tick that box with the RTC.
You could do, but what we look at is that when you break it down and look at it into its fundamental elements, you could be contaminated. But the way that we style our scenario means that we're getting information. So there's something, it may be a minor spill that we found inside the incident level. So I'm not going to give everything away. I don't want to steal all our magic. But but the way that we actually set up this scenario, that there's been a minor spill and there's a minor contamination on the casualty, they would be required to go onto the MDT to print off the chem data. If the service doesn't have an MDT, we have everything laminated, ready to go. So it's as if they're going through that they have printed it off. Then there'll be a requirement to then look at that and to understand what's on that chem data from that perspective, and to put the processes in place to safely decontaminate the firefighter. And that, and that would naturally lead them down to a level 1 sort of approach of a facilitating an apprentice or a firefighter to come out of a risk area where they've been a minor contamination, washed off, and then they're coming out through that way. So it's setting up that level 1 decontam.
Okay. Take me to pumping. I know I asked about it earlier, but I wanted to circle back to it. Is there any aspects of pumping involved? Because you might assume there is within the BA scenario, or the search and rescue scenario, sorry. But I've seen certain instances of when that's not covered. And I would consider that to be a foundational skill for a firefighter in their initial acquisition of skills to be able to competently demonstrate, because that's probably the thing they're going to be pointed at regularly. They're either going to be a body on the incident ground itself, they're going to be doing hose, they're going to be contributing to an RTC, but I'm going to throw them on the pump as well, because I expect them to be pretty hot, on their pumping capabilities, because they're freshest out of training school. But I've not seen that assessed in certain organizations.
So what on this point, what I would say is so as I said, now we're on version 1.2. Previously in 1.1, it was around safely operating around water. Okay, so now that area has been covered in S7. All right, in the professional discussion, which we'll talk about in a bit, if that's all right. But what they've done is they've moved working in and around water to the professional discussion, because what we're finding is practically to lift from open water and to be able to see every apprentice lifting from open water, you're taking that immersive, realistic experience out of the scenario. Right, in this instance, to actually, to lose the prime, then somebody else to step in, it's not realistic. So you wouldn't really do that in an operational incident, and they've moved it into PD. Now, when you look at assessing against the different areas, S12 talks about use and maintain specialist equipment. So show us, and that is part of. So to get back to your point, yes, we will assess people using the appliance, and we will assess them pumping, from a pressure fed supply, but pumping, and to understand what the different gauges mean, how to actually, if you've got high pressure and low pressure operating, how, what from a safety perspective, what do they need to do? They need to know about all, and we will assess them against that, because we feel that that's a fundamental part. As I mentioned before,
does that involve? Is that the search and rescue then? Is that?
Yeah, so that would be a fundamental. So what we would do is we would have a BA scenario. In our BA scenario, we'd have crews operating in the risk area. In BA, you'd also having crews supplying water to them. You would have potentially covering jets. We'd have people working from the head of a ladder. In this scenario, because there may be flaming combustion coming out of the roof area, all at the same time. So we've got simultaneous assessment going on. Obviously with meaning that you've got somebody on the pump. The crews may have gone in rapid deployment, which means that one of the other firefighters then is taking the board from rapid deployment into stage 1. All right, so as you can hopefully you can picture that in your mind. This is very much an immersive experience now. So it's not a paint by numbers. It's not firefighters standing in a line. Now I want you to be number 1 on the ladder. No, the ladder needs to go up there. I need to slip and pitch the 9-meter ladder to the roof there, take a leg lock, and actually produce onto the roof, because we've got flaming combustion coming out. Or fire's now out. I need to take a thermal imaging camera up there and to check for any heat signatures. That's what you do on a job. So therefore, we replicate that as much as we possibly can in this, in this training, in this assessment environment.
Roger that. That really helps. Thank you. I love seeing that aspect of it. So help me understand a little bit about how you got into your role as well, because the secondment aspect of services I find
Yeah.
fascinating, and it's something that isn't happening as much anymore.
No, it's not. So I was obviously looking after the apprenticeship with Greater Manchester in my role as the lead workplace tutor. So I had a group of individuals that would go around and support the apprentices after I'd run the recruits courses. So I knew what the recruit journey looked like, and I had a strong understanding of what the journey looked like towards this endpoint assessment. And we'd taken through a number of cohorts. We'd taken 2 cohorts through endpoint assessment. So I had a really good understanding of what that endpoint assessment process looked like as well. Probably about 60 apprentices had gone through EPA at this stage. I identified that there was a role coming up, working for the partnership between the NFCC and Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. Obviously, they put out that they wanted somebody a role to actually be that sort of point, that relationship manager, to carry out that role, and to coordinate the assessments, liaising with the employers and training providers, and actually lead on endpoint assessments for the partnership. I felt that from all my experience that I'd had, obviously, knew that actually the apprenticeship was for the whole of the fire sector. Having we were obviously back when we first started our chat. My background, obviously, with the RAF and with private sector, and obviously throughout local authority, extensive training background as well. I'd worked at Morton for a period of time, and I was in training at Seven
Were you an
Park.
associate tutor at Morton then? Does that like a
Well, I was there.
was that
I was
another
actually there.
secondment?
Yeah, I was on secondment. Yeah, so I was seconded
Again,
to
they
the
don't
fire.
do many of them down there. There's only 1 or 2 at
Yeah,
Morton now, I think.
this is going back to 2010, 11 now. We're
Wow.
going back to. So I was there for a period of time and went back to service, and I worked at Seven Park Training Centre before I transferred up to Manchester. So I've done a lot of different things within my role and I thought I've got a really good, decent background, which is quite diverse. I understood the apprenticeship, so much. I mean, there's probably people who've got a lot more knowledge and experience than I have, but at this point in time, I felt quite, I felt quite like a broad understanding of everything, and I thought that would be a really good fit for me. And I really thought that the challenge of taking this on would be really, would be a great opportunity. So I wanted to, I applied for the role. I had a conversation with the Chief Fire Officer of Oxford and Robert Dougal, who was brilliant with me. I had a great conversation about what the expectations were. Katie Rollison down in Cornwall, who is the business manager down there. I think she's area manager equivalent, Green Book, about what obviously the expectations were. And I really liked the idea of sort of not only doing the sort of poacher. I don't like the poacher come gamekeeper rule,
Yeah.
but do you understand what I mean? That
Yeah,
actually looking at it
absolutely.
from
Yeah.
the different side. But having those experiences that I'd had over that period of time of preparing, I thought that I would be in a really good place to support other services and other people that were still a bit further down that journey than we were,
Mm.
but to help them, prepare their apprentices, and also, to see, and have a footprint, if you will, and to say, yeah, I've supported apprentices across the country now to get to achieve their apprentice endpoint assessment. So that was one of the main drivers, to be honest, Pete, why I went, to go for the job that I did.
Do you think there'll be a continued opportunities for other people to do? And if in fact, it gives me a good opportunity to ask you about the assessors aspect of it as well. There'll be people listening to this, wanting to get more involved in it. You keep talking about these assessors. How do you actually source these individuals?
Okay, so this is one of the key areas for me, that the assessors, we source them from around the country. They're all approved from their learning development managers. And obviously the CPD for each one of these is managed by their service. Key areas for us that we provide comprehensive training for them as well once they've applied. So, and obviously they've been approved from the L&D managers. We provide comprehensive training, mentoring throughout. We have a roadmap to assessing,
So
which
does
is
the
all on a
service have to sign up
Sorry.
for something? Do services actually have to sign up for it themselves, or can you as an instructor in wherever Humberside, can you just raise your hand and email NFCC? Or because there seems to be a lot of involvement with the service rather than the individual? Or do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So pretty much how things work is that we put an application or a job advert out on the NFCC portal, and people would then apply. Once they've applied to us, they would need approval from their service to say yes, that they can be released, and we would have a service level agreement between Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service or the partnership and that service, because obviously we need to think about insurance, and obviously the payment for their time. So there's a service level agreement, which is it's a partnership agreement. How we're going to work collaboratively and how we are going to support the individual, and how we're going to make sure that they are the service is recompensed or the individual's recompensed.
How do they get paid? Does the service get paid or does the person get paid?
Yeah.
So if I was a watch manager in Devon and Somerset or wherever, and I wanted to do this, I work on station on a 224.
Yeah.
Is my service getting paid for it? Do I get paid for it? Is it just a professional development opportunity, or do I actually get paid for it?
Yeah, so it would depend. If you're coming on your days off, we pay the service for your time. So they will be paid X amount of money for the days that you're with us. We provide the accommodation, we provide your food while you're with us as well. But the service is recompensed for your time. If that's in your own time, then the service will pay you that money. But if you're coming in services time, so let's, for example, you're a training instructor and you're coming Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we would pay the service for your time, to make
at
sure
your
that
current
the service,
rank, I'm guessing.
At your current role. Well, we pay a nominal fee, which is more than we more than recompensate the service for that time, to make sure that they're certainly not out of pocket.
Right.
And whilst they're with us,
make it to the person, I'm guessing, or is that down to the service what they choose to do with it?
It is. Yeah, it definitely is. But if you're if you're coming in works time, the service is recompensed. If you come in your own time, then you will be paid.
But is there a bit of a barrier there? I'm only talking like as I look at the whole thing, like if my service says no, then I can't go and do it. Because I imagine there's certain services where, and we won't ask you to name any names, but I imagine you get a lot of assessors from certain services, and some services have probably said no, like we can't release you, or we can't whatever, or I don't know.
There is an element, Pete, where services can't release, and so if we look back pre-COVID, that this was all put together, right? So the EPA, we identified that there was a gap, all right, for an endpoint assessment provision for the fire and rescue services. There is another EPAO out there that are doing a fantastic job, but there's so many different services now, and there's so many different apprenticeships within the fire sector, not only the operational firefighter, where there's a lot of work, and there is a lot of requirements for any endpoint assessment organisations. So when the partnership was put together, they wanted something for the service by the service.
Right.
Okay? So when you look at the benefits, certainly those services that have got apprentices in them, obviously you're not only enhancing, so coming to work with me as an assessor, you're not only enhancing your assessor's knowledge and experience through the knowledge of it, but look at it from the knowledge and skills that if you come to work with me, right, that you're getting those knowledge and skills from the endpoint assessment brought back into service to enhance and advance what you do in your service. So you could be going along this merry route, quite junior in that development journey towards that endpoint assessment. You may not have gone through that before as a service. When you come and work with us, what you're doing is you're showing them, this is what they're looking for. All right. So it also allows you to share collective experiences, but, which is brilliant, for collaboration and collaborative working. But it gives us that credibility using current competent serving watch officers to assess.
Right.
So I think that the big area for that is that if you were to have a unique selling point, would be with assessors from around the country. And our view is if you provide an assessor for 4 days a year to come and work with us, which you paid for, that return on investment to services that they're feeding everything, all that back into your service for 360 plus days. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I can see the benefit that services would get from that. Is there no concern around, I don't know, like would those assessors just be allowed to tell their apprentices how the thing goes? I don't know. We've discussed in and around aspects of it today, but we have also navigated this conversation strategically so as to,
Yeah.
we don't want people ticking boxes when they go into these things.
No.
That might be difficult to navigate because on one side we're saying you'll get the benefit of seeing behind the curtain, but then on the other side we're saying don't tell people what's behind the curtain.
I understand. I mean, yeah, it does. I mean, obviously, we have a really, really strong malpractice and maladministration policy, that we have to adhere to, and all our assessors sign up to. But what they can certainly do is they have that understanding of this is a practical scenario. This isn't an old school standing in a line 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to slip and pitch that ladder. So by enabling and training them, preparing them for a immersive practical scenario, that isn't anywhere behind the curtain, because if they understand that, then they can prepare apprentices for that.
Right.
Again, you can't replicate that all the time because you're working with different people. The scenarios will change, dependent on resources, on the location, and we have a suite of assessments that we will prepare them for different scenarios each time. So it's not always, oh, well, they're going to do assessment this, then they're going to do this, then they're going to do that. Things
Nice.
will always change, things always evolve. And it's the same when it comes to things like the professional discussion. And I hope we haven't talked about this yet, Pete, but this is one of the biggest areas that apprentices and fire and rescue services, they do worry about so much, which is the professional discussion. And if it's all right with you, I just wanted to just touch on this.
Yeah, please do, because it's a really important aspect. And I think from my limited experience, it's the area that people struggle most with.
It is. No. So remember a bit earlier, we talked about gateway requirements, and the gateway itself, it requires the apprentice to provide the portfolio, which is underpinned. The professional discussion is underpinned by the portfolio of evidence, which is put together by the apprentice up at this gateway element. And there's 14 different areas that they've got to provide evidence for the knowledge, skills, and experience behaviors for this. And a lot of people have, within the fire service, we do a lot of practical training. We do, and they're assessed against lots of different practical elements. They also do a lot of tests, and I know we talked about this before. So when it comes to the multi-choice questions, they're quite used to and familiar with this as individuals. What I think is a lot of people aren't familiar or comfortable with is a professional discussion. And when I mean a professional discussion, it is having a discussion, not a Q&A session. So a lot of people get a concern and a fear and this white coat syndrome and a dread, thinking, I'm going to have to talk about everything. But if they've prepared their portfolios in a way that covers all the knowledge, skills, and behaviours, then they're just talking about what they've done. And we can make sure that that's done really effectively. And the way that we orchestrate that scenario is that following conversations that we've had with neurodiversity specialists, is we put them in the most comfortable position as possible. So we prepare them, we actually have an icebreaker at the beginning. And then the way that we, rather than just going through the knowledge, skills, and behaviours that are set out in the document, we go through something which we like to call the day in the life of a firefighter.
Okay.
Excuse me. So we start off the actual professional discussion, and we talk to them about, what do you do? And just to give you a broad flavour of that, most fire and rescue services will do that. Will have a sort of day which is very similar to others. As in, they will go on parade in the morning. Okay, they'll do the parade in the morning, and the reason for the parade is to check for health and safety, to make sure everybody's fit and well. To make sure. So therefore, we will put that sort of questioning in at that stage. Once they've done the parade and they've done those sort of conversations, most services then will check the equipment. they'll check the breathing apparatus, they'll check all the appliances to make sure that all the operational equipment's suitable and it's ready for deployment. After that, the likelihood is they'll probably go and have a morning readout with the line managers, and they'll talk about what they're going to be doing for the day. After that, they'll probably do practical training up to lunchtime. And then after lunch, most services, and I am generalizing here, Pete, but they will go out and carry out some sort of, whether it's a community safety initiative, some business fire safety initiatives, and all the way throughout that day, you will have incidents come through throughout the day. Would you agree that that's probably
yes, pretty much. It's a fair template.
Yeah. So therefore, by carrying out that professional discussion in that sort of manner, it allows them to sit back, the apprentice, to relax and actually talk through what they do day to day. And we find that that's the best way. It really has feedback from the apprentices. They were really able to relax into the actual professional discussion. And before they knew it, they realized they were just talking about what they did. But ensuring that it's underpinned by that portfolio made sure that they were enabled to put the why they did what they did, as we mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation today, put why they do what they do, not just the what they do.
Right.
And that's the areas, and that's the key that when, again, I'll go back to the assessment plan, and you look at the criteria within the grading descriptors, it talks about, yes, they may be able to describe how they maintain their operational and professional skills and performance. But when you look at then the distinction criteria, it would say explains the benefits of the development and what they've learned, has a clear understanding how their role fits within the organisation and the potential opportunities for progression. So yes, they can list the activities that they've undertaken, but then explain the benefits of the development, what they've learned and understanding. So do you see the disparity there, mate?
Yeah, it's helping. So when you're developing your firefighters and when you're perhaps trying to support them for this, you've gone through and they've recorded loads of great evidence over the last 12, 18 months, whatever it might be, sitting with them and helping them describe the why, not just give a list of things they've done. Why? Because my manager told me to. No. Not just because you but why did your manager tell you to? What do you think they were thinking? What was she thinking? What was he thinking? Why did you do it when they weren't watching? I did it because of this X, Y, Z, maybe this legislation, maybe my own safety, the safety of my colleagues, ABC, X, Y, Z. You know what I mean? That all of that why behind it. That's the bit that people are missing for that distinction criteria, I suppose. Because that's what, I mean, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter if you get the pass or the distinction, but pass is a pass. But you want the best. It's a big investment of your time and life and the start of your career as well. You want to smash it.
You absolutely do. So what we find is, going back to your question before about assessors going back to service, that rather than them seeing this gateway portfolio as almost an auditable tick list, you've got evidence for that, evidence for that, evidence for that. They are in that unique position to look at that objectively and say, okay, you've put this evidence together, but how does that relate to what you're going to be assessed against at the professional discussion? Because otherwise, it's just a tick list. Whereas when they actually sit down with them and say, okay, right, you've given us this example, but you've given us this example of how you've maintained your skills. So what? It's so what? And that then enables apprentices. You're not giving them any answers, but what you're doing is all they're doing is using the assessment plan. But when you've got a comprehensive understanding of what it is that we do as an EPAO, you're enabled then to look at the assessment plan and actually to prepare your apprentice. So there's no peeking behind the curtain with that, really, Pete. That's just having a broader understanding. Yeah.
It's helping people tell their own story. It's exactly what we have with interviews for promotions or anything like that. I'm not asking you to make something up. I'm just helping you tell the truth. Tell your own story.
Yeah, so everybody will have different experiences of their development journey, and it could be that they've had lots of different issues around a certain topic that they've been really struggling with, and this is what they did about it. And they've got a clear understanding of why they did what they do now. And everyone, when you sit in and you actually carry out these professional discussions, it's fascinating. It really is to listen to some of the backgrounds and the experiences of where these individuals have come from to where they are now. And when we sit in and actually have the evaluation, once we've finished, and you explain all the different areas and the facets that they've been assessed against over this 2-day period, and yet you look back 2 years ago where they were, you can see them like that light bulb moment come on, and it's brilliant to
It's
see
a
that.
massive from and to, yeah, and it's probably a really nice way for them to recognize their own growth and reflect on it as well.
It is. No, it really, really is. It's that from and to. This is where you were to where you are now. And even still, once they've passed that endpoint assessment, this is just my analogy. It's the learning to drive. You've passed your test. Now you learn to drive.
Yeah.
I
want to be really respectful of your time, because I know we've been going for like 2.5 hours
yeah,
now.
sorry about that.
Awesome. No, mate, this is great. And it's a great reflection. It's been a beautiful flowing conversation, but I'd be remiss. I did on call for 10 years as part of my career, and I don't see at the minute how this is. I know there's work being done, so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time before we close our conversation about looking at what's being done for the retained and the on-call side of our sector, because they are a colossal resource. They're incredible individuals. They really are the backbone of many services. For many services, they make up the majority of their operational staff. So what's being done, and can you glean any insights into the sector for people that aren't aware? Is this down the pipe? Is it something we're looking at in the future? And how close are we to being able to give that equal and fair opportunity for them to obtain these qualifications?
I know this, yeah. So they're a vital resource, Pete. Our colleagues, retained firefighters, on-call firefighters. Services call them different things, but without them, lots of services they wouldn't exist. Lots of parts of our country wouldn't have firefighter cover without this resource. And when you look at it from the apprentice perspective, I know there's been a lot of work undertaken. Certainly, I'm aware of in Devon and Somerset, they've been doing a lot of work around how they can take apprentices through from the on-call through the apprenticeship journey. I think there's certain services having a few teething issues around how long that journey looks.
That's it, isn't it? It's the difficulty of the constraints of the structure, and the fact that obviously the retained staff don't get as much time to train, to put into their own development. That's a big barrier.
It is a barrier. It is a barrier. It's not one that I'm sure that with a lot more, looking into how we can't evolve. But I think also that where we are as a sector as well, there is also a concern that you start somebody on an apprenticeship with the on-call, and then at some point through that potentially, and we are looking at elongating this process. I mean, most services now are looking at 24 months, 26 months for their apprenticeship program. For an on-call firefighter, that could potentially add another 12 months on top of that. You could be looking at, potentially another like up to 4 years potentially in all some services that we've discussed. But during that period, there's a lot of transferees from retained to whole time.
Yeah, that's the problem. Which is a great thing, that we want to offer those opportunities for people to do that.
Absolutely.
Then it's like, you've committed to doing this thing, and that's actually an agreement with the governmental funding structure that we can't just easily jump out of.
So the only way I can explain this is there are obstacles in the way. I'm sure that it's not something that couldn't be overcome. Whether they look at a slightly different model, I'm not sure, but it's certainly conversations that I've been involved with, and a lot of services are asking the question, could we provide an endpoint assessment for them? Absolutely. Are we willing to have conversations with them? Obviously it's not my role to look at that sort of training side of things, because obviously I'll be stepping out of the barriers and the constraints of the job that I'm doing if I start to give them, but certainly we have support and conversations with them. Absolutely we can. How they do that, well, that's a different conversation. How they facilitate that and look at that developmental process for each one of those individuals, especially with those other things that we've just discussed. I'm not sure. That's obviously down to each service to look at. But I know, is it possible? Absolutely. Yes, it is possible.
It's just something we need to put some more time in. And I know, as we alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, as we have more individuals with different backgrounds, different diverse ways of approaching these challenges, I'm 100% confident we will. There's an appetite. If there's a big enough desire, then there's a big enough why. You'll overcome anyhow. We just have to make it a really intentional thing that we want to do, and then resources, time, adaptations will be made to give that fairness opportunity to these individuals, because we need to be really careful with that. Otherwise, these people won't feel appreciated, and retention and recruitment is a big challenge, and we need to be showing that we're giving equal opportunities. Otherwise, what's the incentive? You're going to treat me like a second-class citizen, like a second-class member of staff, and it will go against the values. And I think if we're not careful in a lot of services, we are doing a little bit of hypocrisy in the way we treat our retained staff, and we do need to be very careful with that as we move forward.
We really do, and I think as a fire sector as a whole as well, Pete, I would expand that. One of the most rewarding things that I did when I first started this role was working with the RAF Fire Service, and facilitating their endpoint assessments. Having been in that environment many years ago myself, so being able to provide that provision for them, and knowing the background and what they would do, and making the scenario suit the role that they do, was really rewarding for me. And having that insight, so I couldn't agree more that, making sure that this is available, the apprenticeship is available, and being able to provide a provision that is suitable to each one of these different, the fire sector's needs is really important.
Mate, I found that absolutely fascinating. I think we've discussed so many different levels there. We've gone in a million different directions, but down some really, really, really valuable rabbit holes that will hopefully unfold and open up the different layers for people, line managers, watch managers, training development, learning development, station managers who never did this when they came in, that aren't confident enough to ask the questions, or they feel like they haven't been told it in the right way. I think this is going to be a really valuable resource for people to listen to again and again and again, pause, interpret, rewind, and get a fuller, honest understanding from a subject matter expert like yourself, who is elbow deep in it every day. So I really want to thank you for your time, mate. People won't know, this is an early morning conversation. You've sacrificed time out of your day and your life and your family and your role to come and share it with us, mate. And I'm really respectful of that. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you, Peter. Thanks for the opportunity. And obviously, if anyone does have any questions, I'll be able to share my contact details. And if
yes, sorry, please. Would you prefer an email address or the LinkedIn link? Yeah, I'll ask you to send it over to me after this, and we'll drop it in the notes. So we'll have the notes. If people want to take a look underneath now, we will have links to the documentation that you referenced earlier, and we will have contact links for yourself, for people to, because despite the best of our efforts and intentions, I'm confident we will have missed a few little bits that people perhaps want some expansion onto, or just simply to ask their own personal questions about their experiences or their services. So we will put those contact links and document links in the notes for this episode.
Brilliant. Yeah, happy to. Always happy to ask, to answer any questions that people have, or just to share their experiences. And if anyone is considering, wanting to be an assessor, coming to work with the partnership, again, please let us know. I know that we will be going out for applications again, but if it's something that you just want to have any formal conversation about first, again, I'd be more than happy to have that chat.
Jim, thanks so much for your time today, mate. I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Pete. Thank you.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our drive and purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.